Homeland, written by R.A. Salvatore, narrated by Victor Bevine. Prelude. Never does a star grace this land with a poet's love of twinkling mysteries, nor does the sun send to here its rays of warmth and life. This is the Underdark, the secret world beneath the bustling surface of the forgotten realms, whose sky is a ceiling of heartless stone, and whose walls show the grey blandness of death in the torchlight of the foolish surface dwellers that stumble here. This is not their world, not the world of light. Most who come here uninvited do not return. Those who do escape to the safety of their surface homes return changed. Their eyes have seen the shadows and the gloom, the inevitable doom of the Underdark. Dark corridors meander throughout the dark realm in winding courses, connecting caverns great and small, with ceilings high and low. Mounds of stone as pointed as the teeth of a sleeping dragon leer down in silent threat, or rise up to block the way of intruders. There is a silence here, profound and foreboding, the crouched hush of a predator at work. Too often the only sound, the only reminder to travelers of the Underdark that they have not lost
Benny, how you doing?
altogether is a
Sorry, my
echoing drip of water,
I'm a little hard to see right now.
beast slipping through the silent
My glasses are...
underdark pools of chilled water. What lies beneath the still onyx surface of these pools, one can only guess. What secrets await the brave? What horrors await the foolish? Only the imagination can reveal, until the stillness is disturbed.
What the hell?
This is the Underdark. There are pockets of life here. Cities as
How you doing,
on the surface.
Benny? Hope you're doing well, bro.
Bends and turns in the gray stone. A traveler might stumble suddenly into the perimeter of such a city. A stark contrast to the
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
These places are not havens, though. Only the foolish traveler would assume so.
Yeah, I can see him popping up.
Evil races in all the realms. Most notably, the Duergar.
No, I fell asleep with them on last night, and I move around a lot when I sleep. So I think when they fell off, I rolled on them, so they're kind of twisted, and I tried twisting them back to how they would be, and it snapped. I have a tape holding it on, but it doesn't hold them on very good. They keep just because how I have a fat head. What can I say? But since they have to stretch out like that, it tends to come off the tape, so it doesn't work very good. And then without them, as you can see, they're a little thick side. Without my glasses, I'm pretty much blind.
Like their cities, they are a beautiful, slender, and delicate people, with features sharp and haunting. Yet the Drow are the rulers of this unruled world, the deadliest of the deadly, and all other races take cautious note of their passing. Beauty itself pales at the end of a dark elf sword. The Drow are the survivors, and this is the Underdark, the Valley of Death, the land of madness.
Let's do a dab.
Part 1. Station.
Oh, hell yeah.
Station.
Not me, I'm blind as shit. That's why I have it as close as it is, just because so I can actually read it.
Ambition overrides good sense, and compassion is thrown away in its face. Oh, love, the Spider Queen. Ascension to
smoke this after I do a dab.
The Spider Queen is a deity of chaos.
Oh, I wish I had 2020. I hate wearing glasses.
Do not look with ill favor upon ambition.
But I've had to wear glasses since I was a kid.
Every society must boast of these. To openly commit murder or wage war invites the pretense of justice.
Yeah, pretty much. I will. I'm gonna take a dab first.
To stick a dagger in the back of a rival during the chaos of a larger battle, or in the quiet shadows of an alley, however, is quite accepted, even applauded. Investigation is not the forte of brow justice. Station is the way of life, the ambition she bestows to further the plans, to keep her drow children along their appointed course of self-imprisonment. Children, pawns no longer, dancing dolls with a spider queen, puppets on the imperceptible, impervious strands of their web, all clawing the spider queen's lap. All comes to her pleasure, and all fall to the hunters of her pleasure. Station is the paradox of the world of our people, the limitation of our power within the hunger for power. It is gained through treachery, and invites treachery against those who gain it. Those most powerful in Menzo Baranzon spend their days watching over their shoulders, defending against the battles that define their backs. Their deaths usually come from the front. Drizzt. 1. Menzo Baranzon. To a surface dweller, he might have passed undetected only a foot away. The padded footfalls of his lizard were too light to be heard, and the pliable and perfectly crafted mesh armor that both rider and mount wore bent and creased with their movements, as well as if the suits had grown over their skin. Dinan's lizard trotted along in an easy but swift gait, floating over the broken floor, up the walls, and even across the long tunnel's ceiling. Subterranean lizards, with their sticky and soft three-toed feet, were preferred mounts for just this ability to scale stone as easily as a spider. Crossing hard ground left no damning tracks in the lighted surface world, but nearly all of the creatures of the Underdark possessed infravision, the ability to see in the infrared spectrum.
I definitely appreciate when everyone stops by.
That could easily be tracked if they followed a predictable course along a corridor.
Especially on how late I do them.
To his saddle as the lizard plodded along a stretch of the ceiling, then sprang out in a twisting descent to a point farther along the wall. Dinan did not want to be tracked. He had no light to guide him, but he needed none. He was a dark elf, a drow, an ebon-skinned cousin of those sylvan folk who danced under the stars on the world's surface. To Dinan's superior eyes, which translated subtle variations of heat into vivid and colorful images, the Underdark was far from a lightless place. Colors all across the spectrum swirled before him in the stone of the walls and the floor, heated by some distant fissure or hot stream. The heat of living things was the most distinctive, letting the dark elf view his enemies in details as intricate as any surface dweller would find in brilliant daylight. Normally, Dinan would not have left the city alone. The world of the Underdark was too dangerous for solo treks, even for a drow elf. This day was different, though. Dinan had to be certain that no unfriendly drow eyes marked his passage. A soft blue magical glow beyond a sculpted archway told the drow that he neared the city's entrance, and he slowed the lizard's pace accordingly. Few used this narrow tunnel, which opened into Tirbreth, the northern section of Menzo Baranzon, devoted to the academy, and none but the mistresses and masters, the instructors of the academy, could pass through here without attracting suspicion. Dinan was always nervous when he came to this point. Of the 100 tunnels that opened off the main cavern of Menzo Baranzon, this one was the best guarded. Beyond the archway, twin statues of gigantic spiders sat in quiet defense. If an enemy crossed through, the spiders would animate and attack, and alarms would be sounded throughout the academy.
Hell yeah, Benny. It's all good.
Dinan dismounted, leaving his lizard clinging comfortably to a wall at his chest length.
They don't have to comment.
The collar of his Biwak,
it's appreciated if they comment and hit the like button. They don't have to. They can just chill.
Dinan produced the insignia of House Doerden, a spider wielding various weapons in each of its 8 legs, and emblazoned with the letters DN for Dernan Naashes Bernan, the ancient and formal name of House Doerden. You will await my return. Dinan whispered to the lizard as he waved the insignia before it. As with all the Drow elves, the insignia of House Do'Urden held several magical
That shit, hell
honors,
yeah,
one
Benny.
of which gave family members absolute control over the house pets.
Definitely
The
appreciate you
lizard would
stopping
have built
by.
unfailingly, holding its position as though it were rooted to the stone, even if a scurry rat, its favorite morsel, napped a few
I
feet
might be
from its maw.
moving up that
Dinan took a deep breath and
that
gingerly
way
stepped to the archway. He could
sometime
see the
next year.
spiders leering down at him from their 15-foot height. He was a Drow of the city, not an enemy, and could pass through
At least
any
after
other
the
tunnel
holidays.
unconcerned. But the academy was an unpredictable place. Dinan had heard that the spiders often refused entry, viciously, even to uninvited Drow. He could not be delayed by fears and possibilities, Dinan reminded himself. His business was of the utmost importance to his family's battle plans. Looking straight ahead, away from the towering spiders, he strode between them and onto the floor of Tir Bresh. He moved to the side and paused, first to be certain that no one lurked nearby, and to admire the sweeping view of Menzoberranzan. No one, Drow or otherwise, had ever looked out from this spot without a sense of wonder at the Drow city. Tir Bresh was the highest point on the floor of the 2-mile cavern, affording a panoramic view to the rest of
Thanksgiving food
Menzoberranzan.
and Christmas food.
The cubby of the academy was narrow,
Especially this
holding
year
only
for
the three
Christmas.
structures that comprised the Drow school. Eric Tinolith, the
My mom's
spider-shaped
actually
school
going
of
to
law.
make some
Sorcerre, the
homemade
gracefully
tamales
curving,
for
men-inspired tower of
Christmas
wizardry.
this year.
And Melee Magvir, the somewhat plain pyramidal structure where male
So I'm
fighters
definitely looking
learned
forward
their
to
trade.
that.
Beyond Tir Bresh, through the ornate stalagmite columns that marked the entrance to the academy, the cavern dropped away quickly and spread wide, going far beyond Dinan's line of vision to either side and farther back than his keen eyes could possibly see. The colors of Menzoberranzan were threefold to the sensitive eyes of the Drow. Heat patterns from various fissures and hot springs swirled about the entire cavern. Purple and red, bright yellow and subtle blue, crossed and merged, climbed the walls and stalagmite mounds, or ran off singularly in cutting lines against the backdrop of dim gray stone. More confined than these generalized and natural gradations of color in the infrared spectrum were the regions of intense magic, like the spiders
Right,
Dinan
they're
had walked
definitely
between,
good.
virtually glowing with energy. Finally, there were the actual lights of the city.
Yep.
Fairy fire and highlighted
Wrapped and
sculptures
cooked
on the
inside the
houses.
corn husk.
The Drow were proud of the beauty of their designs, and especially ornate columns or perfectly crafted gargoyles
Yeah,
were
well,
almost always limned in
our
permanent
mom makes
magical
them.
lights.
She makes them like
Even from this
big old
distance,
fat
Dinan could
burrito
make
type,
out
like
House
really
Bayan,
thick ones.
first house of Menzoberranzan. It encompassed
cheers,
20
Fire. How you
stalagmite
doing?
pillars and half again that number of gigantic stalactites. House Bayanri had existed for 5,000 years, since the founding of Menzoberranzan, and in that time the work to perfect the house's art had never ceased. Practically every inch of the immense structure glowed in fairy fire,
Oh shit,
blue
hell
at the
yeah.
outlying towers, and brilliant
Well,
purple
I
at
think
the
it was
huge
last
central
year
plant.
or the
The
year
sharp light
before.
of candles, foreign to the Underdark, glowed through
My
some of the
brother
windows
did
of a distant house.
infused turkey one
Only
year
clerics or wizards
with all
would
kind
light
of
the
cannon
fires,
butter. Then he did an infused
as
ham.
necessary pains in their world of scrolls and parchments. This was Menzoberranzan, the city of Drow.
Because Thanksgiving I don't really
20,000 dark
celebrate.
elves lived here.
I'll eat turkey
20,000
food, but
soldiers in the army of
I
Eden.
don't celebrate it as a holiday.
A wicked smile spread across Dinan's thin lips when he thought of some of those soldiers who would fall this
Hell
night.
yeah. That's why I'm smoking
Dinan
some of the
studied Narbondale, the
the
huge central pillar that served as the time clock
passion
of
fruit
Menzoberranzan.
that I grew.
Narbondale was the only way the Drow had to mark the passage of time in a world that
Oh yeah,
otherwise
it's not
knew
that
no
right.
days
It'll dry
and
out
no
quick.
seasons. At the end of each day, the city's appointed archmage cast his magical fires into the base of the stone pillar. There the spell lingered throughout the cycle, a full day on the surface, and gradually spread its warmth up the structure of Narbondale until the whole of it glowed red in the infrared spectrum. The pillar was fully dark now, cooled since the Dweomer's fires had expired. The wizard was even now at the base, Dinan reasoned, ready to begin the cycle anew. It was midnight, The appointed hour. Dinan moved away from the spiders and the tunnel exit and crept along the side of Tir Bresh, seeking the shadows of heat patterns in the wall, which would effectively hide the distinct outline of his own body temperature. He came at last to Sorcerer, the school of wizardry, and slipped into the narrow alley between the tower's curving base and Tir Bresh's outer wall. "Student or master?" came the expected whisper. "Only a master may walk out of house in Tir Bresh in the black death of Narbondel," Dinan responded. A heavily robed figure moved around the arc of the structure to stand before Dinan. The stranger remained in the customary posture of a master of the Drow Academy, his arms out before him and bent at the elbows, his hands tight together, one on top of the other in front of his chest. That pose was the only thing about this one that seemed normal to Dinan. "Greetings, faceless one,"
Raising
he
a
signaled in the
real
silent
resonant at the
language of
end.
the Drow, a language as detailed as the spoken word. The quiver of Dinan's hands belied his calm face, though, for the sight of this wizard put him as far on the edge of his nerves as he had ever been. "Second boy Do'Urden," the wizard replied in a gestured code. "Have you my payment?" "You will be compensated," Dinan signaled pointedly, regaining his composure in the first swelling bubbles of his
Yeah,
teeth.
that'd be a good reason to
"Do you
switch to
dare
ribs.
doubt the promise of Malice Do'Urden, matron mother of Dairman Naasha's Bernan, 10th house of Menzo Baranzon?" The faceless one slumped back, knowing he had erred. "My apologies, second boy of House Do'Urden," he answered, dropping to one knee in a gesture of surrender. Since he had entered this conspiracy, the wizard had feared that his impatience might cost him his life. He had been caught in the violent throes of one of his own magical experiments, the tragedy melting away all of his facial features and leaving behind a blank hotspot of white and green glue. Matron Malice Do'Urden, reputedly as skilled as anyone in all the vast city in mixing potions and salves, had offered him a sliver of hope that he could not pass by. No pity found its way into Dinan's callous heart, but House Do'Urden needed the wizard. "You will get your salve," Dinan promised calmly, "but Alton Devere is dead."
Yeah, no,
"Of course,"
definitely.
the wizard agreed.
It's definitely
Listen,
hard to mess up ribs.
Dinan crossed his arms and considered the question. Matron Malice had instructed him that Alton Devere should die even as their family's battle commenced. That scenario now seemed too clean, too easy to Dinan. The faceless one did not miss the sparkle that suddenly brightened the scarlet glow in the young Do'Urden's heat-sensing eyes. "Wait for Narbondel's light to approach its zenith," Dinan replied, his hands working through the signals excitedly, and his grimace seeming more of a twisted grin. "Should the doomed boy know of his house's fate before he dies?" the wizard asked, guessing the wicked intentions behind Dinan's instructions. "As the killing blow falls," answered Dinan, "let Alton Devere die without hope." Dinan retrieved his mount and sped off down the empty corridors, finding an intersecting route that would take him in through a different entrance to the city proper. He came in along the eastern end of the great cavern, Menzo Baranzon's produce section, where no Drow families would see that he had been outside the city limits, and where only a few unremarkable stalagmite pillars rose up from the flat stone. Dinan spurred his mount along the banks of Donegarden, the city's small pond, with its moss-covered island that housed a fair-sized herd of cattle-like creatures called Rothe. 100 goblins and orcs looked up from their herding and fishing duties to mark the Drow soldiers' swift passage. Knowing their restrictions as slaves, they took care not to look Dinan in the eye. Dinan would have paid them no heed anyway. He was too concerned by the urgency of the moment. He kicked his lizard to even greater speeds when he again was on the flattened, curving avenues between the glowing Drow castles. He moved toward the south-central region of the city, toward the grove of giant mushrooms that marked the section of the finest houses in Menzo Baranzon. As he came around one blind turn, he nearly ran over a group of 4 wandering bugbears. The giant, hairy goblin things paused a moment to consider the Drow, then moved slowly but purposefully out of his way. The bugbears recognized him as a member of House Do'Urden.
That's all good, fire.
He was a noble, a son of a high priestess, and his surname, Do'Urden, was the name of his house. Of the 20,000 dark elves in Menzoberranzan, only 1,000 or so were nobles, actually the children of the 67 recognized families of the city. The rest were common soldiers. Bugbears were not stupid creatures. They knew a noble from a commoner. And though drow elves did not carry their family insignia in plain view, the pointed and tailed cut of Dinan's stark white hair and the distinctive pattern of purple and red lines in his black coafwi told them well enough who he was. The mission's urgency pressed upon Dinan, but he could not ignore the bugbear's slight. How fast would they have scampered away if he had been a member of House Baenri, or one of the other 7 ruling houses, he wondered. You will learn respect of House Do'Urden soon enough, the dark elf whispered under his breath, as he turned and charged his lizard at the group. The bugbears broke into a run, turning down an alley strewn with stones and debris. Dinan found his satisfaction by calling on the innate powers of his race. He summoned a globe of darkness, impervious to both infravision and normal sight, in the fleeing creature's path. He supposed that it was unwise to call such attention to himself, but a moment later, when he heard crashing and sputtered curses as the bugbears stumbled blindly over the stones, he felt it was worth the risk. His anger sated, he moved off again, picking a more careful route through the heat shadows. As a member of the 10th house of the city, Dinan could go as he pleased within the giant cavern without question. But Matron Malice had made it clear that no one connected to House Do'Urden was to be caught anywhere near the mushroom grove. Matron Malice, Dinan's mother, was not to be crossed, but it was only a rule after all. In Menzoberranzan, one rule took precedence over all of the petty others. Don't get caught. At the mushroom grove's southern end, the impetuous drow found what he was looking for. A cluster of 5 huge floor-to-ceiling pillars that were hollowed into a network of chambers and connected with metal and stone parapets and bridges. Red glowing gargoyles, the standard of the house, glared down from 100 perches like silent sentries. This was House de Vere, 4th house of Menzoberranzan. A stockade of tall mushrooms ringed the place, every 5th one a shrieker, a sentient fungus named and favored as guardians for the shrill cries of alarm it emitted whenever a living being passed it by. Dinan kept a cautious distance, not wanting to set off one of the shriekers, and knowing also that other, more deadly wards protected the fortress. Matron Malice would see to those. An expectant hush permeated the air of this city section. It was general knowledge throughout Menzoberranzan that Matron Jennifer of House de Vere had fallen out of favor with Lolth, the spider queen deity to all drow, and the true source of every house's strength. Such circumstances were never openly discussed among the drow, but everyone who knew fully expected that some family lower in the city hierarchy soon would strike out against the crippled House de Vere. Matron Jennifer and her family had been the last to learn of the Spider Queen's displeasure. Ever was that Lolth's devious way. And Dinan could tell just by scanning the outside of House de Vere that the doomed family had not found sufficient time to erect proper defenses. De Vere sported nearly 400 soldiers, many female, but those that Dinan could now see at their posts along the parapets seemed nervous and unsure. Dinan's smile spread even wider when he thought of his own house, which grew in power daily under the cunning guidance of Matron Malice. With all 3 of his sisters rapidly approaching the status of High Priestess, his brother an accomplished wizard, and his uncle Zaknathane, the finest weapons master in all of Menzoberranzan, busily training the 300 soldiers, House Do'Urden was a complete force. And Matron Malice, unlike Jennifer, was in the Spider Queen's
not
full
on this
favor.
one, because
They
live under the ground.
Dinan muttered under his breath, using the formal and ancestral reference to House Do'Urden. 9th house of Menzoberranzan. He liked the sound of it. Halfway across the city, beyond the silver-glowing balcony and the arched doorway 20 feet up the cavern's west wall, sat the principals of House Do'Urden, gathered to outline the final plans of the night's work. On the raised dais at the back of the small audience chamber sat venerable Matron Malice, her belly swollen in the final hours of pregnancy. Flanking her in their places of honor were her 3 daughters, Maya, Vierna, and the eldest, Briza, a newly ordained high priestess of Lolth. Maya and Vierna appeared as younger versions of their mother, slender and deceptively small, though possessing great strength. Briza, though, hardly carried the family resemblance. She was big, huge by drow standards, and rounded in the shoulders and hips. Those who knew Briza well figured that her size was merely a circumstance of her temperament. A smaller body could not have contained the anger and brutal streak of House Do'Urden's newest high priestess. Dinan should return soon, remarked Risen, the present patron of the family, to let us know if the time is right for the assault. We go before Narbondel finds its morning glow, Briza snapped at him in her thick but razor-sharp voice. She turned a crooked smile to her mother, seeking approval for putting the male in his place. The child comes this night, Matron Malice explained to her anxious husband. We go no matter what news Dinan bears. It will be a boy child, groaned Briza, making no effort to hide her disappointment. 3rd living son of House Do'Urden. To be sacrificed to Lolth, put in Zacnafane, a former patron of the house, who now held the important position of weapons master. The skilled drow fighter seemed quite pleased at the thought of sacrifice, as did Nalthane, the family's eldest son, who stood at Zac's side. Nalthane was the elder boy, and he needed no more competition beyond Dinan within the ranks of House Do'Urden. In accord with custom, Briza glowered, and the red of her eyes brightened. To aid in our victory. Risen shifted uncomfortably. Matron Malice, he dared to speak. You know well the difficulties of birthing. Might the pain distract you? You dare to question the matron mother? Briza started sharply, reaching for the snake-headed whip so comfortably strapped and writhing on her belt. Matron Malice stopped her with an outstretched hand. Attend to the fighting, the matron said to Risen. Let the females of the house see to the important matters of this battle. Risen shifted again and dropped his gaze. Dinan came to the magically wrought fence that connected the keep within the city's west wall with the 2 small stalagmite towers of House Do'Urden, and which formed the courtyard to the compound. The fence was adamantine, the hardest metal in all the world, and adorning it were 100 weapon-wielding spider carvings, each ensorcelled with deadly glyphs and wards. The mighty gate of House Do'Urden was the envy of many a drow house, but so soon after viewing the spectacular houses in the mushroom grove, Dinan could only find disappointment when looking upon his own abode. The compound was plain and somewhat bare, as was the section of wall, with a notable exception of the mithril and adamantine balcony running along the 2nd level, by the arched doorway reserved for the nobility of the family. Each balustrade of that balcony sported 1,000 carvings, all of which blended into a single piece of art. House Do'Urden, unlike the great majority of the houses named Baron's on, did not stand free within groves of stalactites and stalagmites. The bulk of the structure was within a cave, and while this setup was indisputably defensible, Dinan found himself wishing that his family could show a bit more grandeur. An excited soldier rushed to open the gate for the returning 2nd boy. Dinan swept past him without so much as a word of greeting and moved across the courtyard, conscious of the 100 and more curious glances that fell upon him. The soldiers and slaves knew that Dinan's mission this night had something to do with the anticipated battle. No stairway led to the silvery balcony of House Do'Urden's 2nd level. This, too, was a precautionary measure designed to segregate the leaders of the house from the rabble and the slaves. Drow nobles needed no stairs. Another manifestation of their innate magical abilities allowed them the power of levitation. With hardly a conscious thought to the act, Dinan drifted easily through the air and dropped onto the balcony. He rushed through the archway and down the house's main central corridor, which was dimly lit in the soft hues of fairy fire, allowing for sight in the normal light spectrum, but not bright enough to defeat the use of infravision. The ornate brass door at the corridor's end marked the 2nd boy's destination, and he paused before it to allow his eyes to shift back to the infrared spectrum. Unlike the corridor, The room beyond the door had no light source. It was the audience hall of the high priestesses, the anteroom to House Do'Urden's grand chapel. The Drow clerical rooms, in accord with the dark rites of the Spider Queen, were not places of light. When he felt he was prepared, Dinan pushed straight through the door, shoving past the two shocked female guards without hesitation, and moving boldly to stand before his mother. All three of the family daughters narrowed their gaze at their brash and pretentious brother. To enter without permission, he knew they were thinking. Would that it was he who was to be sacrificed this night. As much as he enjoyed testing the limitations of his inferior station as a male, Dinan could not ignore the threatening dances of Vierna, Maya, and Briza. Being female, they were bigger and stronger than Dinan, and had trained all their lives in the use of wicked drow clerical powers and weapons. Dinan watched as enchanted extensions of the clerics, the dreaded snake-headed whips on his sister's belts, began writhing in anticipation of the punishment they would exact. The handles were adamantine and ordinary, but the whip's lengths and multiple heads were living serpents. Briza's whip in particular, a wicked six-headed device, danced and squirmed, tying itself into knots around the belt that held it. Briza was always the quickest to punish. Matron Malice, however, seemed pleased by Dinan's swagger. The second boy knew his place well enough by her measure, and he followed her commands fearlessly and without question. Dinan took comfort in the calmness of his mother's face, quite the opposite of the shining, white-hot faces of his three sisters. "All is ready," he said to her. "House de Vere huddles within its fence, except for Alton, of course, foolishly attending his studies in Sorcerer." "You have met with the Faceless One?" Matron Malice asked. "The Academy was quiet this night." "Our meeting went off perfectly. He has agreed to our contract. Alton de Vere will be dealt with accordingly," Dinan chuckled. He then remembered the slight alteration he had made in Matron Malice's plans, delaying Alton's execution for the sake of his own lust for added cruelty. Dinan's thought evoked another recollection as well. High priestesses of law had an unnerving talent for reading thoughts. "Alton will die this night," Dinan quickly completed the answer,
not much
assuring
going on
others
these
before
days,
they could probe him for more definite
which
details.
I guess is a good thing.
"Excellent." Briza
Means no
growled.
trouble.
Dinan breathed a little easier. "To the meld," Matron Malice ordered. The four drow males moved to kneel before the matron and her daughters.
That's
Risen to
always
Malice,
good.
Zacnafane to Briza, Nalfane to Maya, and Dinan to Vierna. The clerics chanted in unison, placing one hand delicately upon the forehead of their respective soldier, tuning into his passions. "You know your places," Matron
That
Malice
always
said
sucks.
when the
Holidays
ceremony
and
was
birthdays.
completed. She grimaced through the pain of another contraction. "Let our work begin." Less than an hour later, Zacnafane and Briza stood together on the balcony outside the upper entrance to the house. Below them, on the cavern floor, the 2nd and 3rd Brigades of the family army, Rizens and Nalfanes, bustled about, fitting on heated leather straps and metal patches, camouflage against a distinctive elven form to heat-seeing drow eyes. Dinan's group, the initial strike force that included 100 goblin slaves, had long since departed. "We will be known after this night," Briza said. "None would have suspected that a 10th house would dare to move against one as powerful as de Vere. When the whispers ripple out after this night's bloody work, even Be'enri will take note of Dairman Na'ashes Bernan." She leaned out over the balcony to watch as the 2 brigades formed into lines and started out, silently, along separate paths that would bring them through the winding city to the Mushroom Grove and the 5-pillared structure of House de Vere. Zacnafane eyed the back of Matron Malice's eldest daughter, wanting nothing more than to put a dagger into her spine. As always, though, good judgment kept Zac's practiced hand in its place. "Have you the articles?" Briza inquired, showing Zac considerably more respect than she had when Matron Malice sat protectively at her side. Zac was only a male, a commoner allowed to don the family name as his own, because he sometimes served Matron Malice in a husbandly manner, and had once been the patron of the house. Still, Briza feared to name him. Zac was the weapons master of House Do'Urden, a tall and muscular male, stronger than most females, and those who had witnessed his fighting wrath considered him among the finest warriors of either sex in all of Menzoberranzan. Besides Brisa and her mother, both high priestesses of the Spider Queen, Zack Nefane, with his unrivaled swordsmanship, was House Do'Urden's trump. Zack held up the black hood and opened the small pouch on his belt, revealing several tiny ceramic spheres. Brisa smiled evilly and rubbed her slender hands together. "Matron Jennifer will not be pleased," she whispered. Zack returned the smile.
Hey, Gear
and turned
Changer,
to
how you
view the
doing,
departed
bro?
soldiers. Nothing gave the weapons master more pleasure
Yeah, I'm running
than
a little
killing
blind
drow
right now,
elves,
Gear Changer.
particularly clerics of law. "Prepare yourself," Brisa said after
Glasses
a few
kind of
minutes.
broke on me.
Zack shook his thick hair back from his
But
face
how you
and
been
stood
doing, Gear
rigid,
Changer?
eyes tightly closed.
I hope you've been
Brisa
doing
drew
well,
her
bro.
wand slowly, beginning the chant that would activate the device. She tapped Zack on one shoulder, then the other, then held the wand motionless over his head. Zack felt the frosty sprinkles falling down on him, permeating his clothes and armor, even his flesh, until he and all of his possessions had cooled to a uniform temperature and hue. Zack hated the magical chip. It felt as he imagined death would feel. But he knew that under the influence of the wand's sprinkles, he was, to the heat-sensing eyes of the creatures of the Underdark,
Mud
as
wrestling.
gray as common stone, unremarkable and
No, it's probably
undetectable. Zack
in a
opened his
steel
eyes
cage
and
match.
shuddered, flexing his fingers to be sure they could still perform the fine edge of his craft.
And took a
He looked back to
chair
Brisa,
shot to the dome.
already in the midst of
There
the
went my
second spell,
glasses.
the summoning. This one would take a while. So Zack leaned back against the wall and considered again the pleasant, though dangerous, task before him. How thoughtful of Matron Malice to leave all of House de Vere's clerics to him. "It is done," Brisa announced after a few minutes. She led Zack's gaze upward, to the darkness beneath the unseen ceiling of the immense cavern.
It probably was
Zack
being mad
spotted Brisa's
because I was
handiwork
playing
first, an approaching
I was
current
playing
of air,
wrestling last
yellow
night on
tinted
the
and warmer than the
PS5.
normal air of the cavern.
Was it
living current of air.
2K23?
The creature,
And
a conjuration
I
from
probably,
an elemental plane,
went to
swirled to
bed
hover
dreaming
just
about
beyond
that.
the lip of the balcony, obediently
that's the
awaiting
reason.
the summoner's commands. Zack didn't hesitate. He leaped out into the thing's
I was
midst,
playing out my
letting it
matches
hold him
like it was
suspended
actually
above
me
the
in my
floor.
dream.
Brisa offered him a final salute and motioned her servant away. "Good fighting," she called to Zack, though he was already invisible in the air above her. Zack chuckled at the irony of her words as the twisting city of Menzoberranzan rolled out below him. She wanted the clerics of House de Vere dead as surely as Zack did, but for very different reasons. All complications aside, Zack would have been just as happy killing clerics of House Do'Urden. The weapons master took up one of his adamantine swords, a drow weapon magically crafted and unbelievably sharp, with the edge of killing Dweommers. "Good fighting indeed," he whispered. If only Brisa knew how good.
Oh, that sucks, Gear Changer. Hopefully it's nothing serious, brother. Hopefully you get some good news.
That any of the meandering bugbears, or any of the other of the multitude of races that composed Menzoberranzan, drow included, now made great haste to scurry out of his way. This time the second boy of House Do'Urden was not alone. Nearly 60 soldiers of the house walked in tight lines behind him. Behind these, in similar order, though with far less enthusiasm for the adventure, came 100 armed slaves of lesser races. Goblins, orcs, and bugbears. There could be no doubt for onlookers. A drow house was on a march to war. This was not an everyday event in Menzoberranzan, but neither was it unexpected. At least once every decade, a house decided that its position within the city hierarchy could be improved by another house's elimination. It was a risky proposition, for all of the nobles of the victim house had to be disposed of quickly and quietly. If even one survived to lay an accusation upon the perpetrator, the attacking house would be eradicated by Menzoberranzan's merciless system of justice. If the raid was executed to devious perfection, though, no recourse would be forthcoming. All of the city, even the ruling council of the top 8 matron mothers, would secretly applaud the attackers for their courage and intelligence, and no more would ever be said of the incident. Dina took a roundabout route, not wanting to lay a direct trail between House de Werden and House de Vere. A half hour later, for the second time that night, he crept to the Mushroom Grove's southern end, to the cluster of stalagmites that held House de Vere. His soldiers streamed out behind him eagerly, readying weapons and taking full measure of the structure before them. The slaves were slower in their movements. Many of them looked about for some escape, for they knew in their hearts that they were doomed in this battle. They feared the wrath of the Dark Elves more than death itself, though, and would not attempt to flee. With every exit out of Menzoberranzan protected by devious drow magic, where could they possibly go? Every one of them had witnessed the brutal punishment the drow elves exacted on recaptured slaves. At Dinan's command, they jumped into their positions around the mushroom fence. Dinan reached into his large pouch and pulled out a heated sheet of metal. He flashed the object, brightened in the infrared spectrum, 3 times behind him to signal the approaching brigades of Nalfing and Risen. Then, with his usual cockiness, Dinan spun it quickly into the air, caught it, and replaced it in the secrecy of his heat-shielding pouch. On cue with the twirling signal, Dinan's drow brigade fitted enchanted darts to their tiny handheld crossbows and took aim on the appointed targets. Every 5th mushroom was a shrieker, and every dart held a magical dweomer that could silence the roar of a dragon. 2, 3, Dinan counted, his hands signaling the tempo, since no words could be heard within the sphere of magical silence cast about his troops. He imagined the click as the drawn string on his little weapon released, loosing the dart into the nearest shrieker. So it went all around the cluster of House de Vere, the first line of alarm systematically silenced by 36 enchanted darts. Halfway across Menzoberranzan, Matron Malice, her daughters, and 4 of the house's common clerics were gathered in Lolth's unholy circle of 8. They ringed an idol of their wicked deity, a gemstone carving of a drow-faced spider, and called to Lolth for aid in their struggles. Malice sat at the head, propped in a chair angled for birthing. Brisa and Vierna flanked her, Brisa clutching her hand. The select group chanted in unison, combining their energies into a single offensive spell. A moment later, when Vierna, mentally linked to Dinan, understood that the first attack group was in position, the Doerden Circle of 8 sent the first insinuating waves of mental energy into the rival house. Matron Jennifer, her 2 daughters, and the 5 principal clerics of the common troops of House de Vere huddled together in the darkened anteroom of the 5 stalagmite house's main chapel. They had gathered there in solemn prayer every night since Matron Jennifer had learned that she had fallen into Lolth's disfavor. Jennifer understood how vulnerable her house remained until she could find a way to appease the Spider Queen. There were 66 other houses in Menzoberranzan, fully 20 of which might dare to attack House de Vere at such an obvious disadvantage. The 8 clerics were anxious now, somehow suspecting that this night would be eventful. Jennifer felt it first, a chilling blast of confusing perceptions that caused her to stutter over her prayer of forgiveness. The other clerics of House de Vere glanced nervously at the matron's uncharacteristic slip of words, looking for confirmation. "We are under attack," Jennifer breathed to them, her head already pounding with a dull ache under the growing assault of the formidable clerics of House de Werden. A second signal from Dinan put the slave troops into motion. Still using stealth as their ally, they quietly rushed to the mushroom fence and cut through with wide-bladed swords. The second boy of House de Werden watched and enjoyed as the courtyard of House de Vere was easily penetrated. "Not such a prepared guard," he whispered in silent sarcasm to the red-glowing gargoyles on the high walls. The statues had seemed such an ominous guard earlier that night. Now they just watched helplessly. Dinan recognized the measured but growing anticipation in the soldiers around him. Their drow battle lust was barely contained. Every now and then came a killing flash as one of the slaves stumbled over a warding glyph. But the second boy and the other drow only laughed at the spectacle. The lesser races were the expendable fodder of House Do'Urden's army. The only purpose in bringing the goblinoids to House Devere was to trigger the deadly traps and defenses along the perimeter, to lead the way for the drow elves, the true soldiers. The fence was now opened and secrecy was thrown away. House Devere's soldiers met the invading slaves head-on within the compound. Dinan barely had his hand up to begin the attack command when his 60 anxious drow warriors jumped up and charged, their faces twisted in wicked glee and their weapons waving menacingly. They halted their approach on cue, though, remembering one final task set out to them. Every drow, noble or commoner, possessed certain magical abilities. Bringing forth a globe of darkness, as Dinan had done to the bugbears in the street earlier that night, came easily to even the lowliest of the dark elves. So it went now, with 60 Do'Urden soldiers blotting out the perimeter of House Devere above the mushroom fence in ball after ball of blackness. For all of their stealth and precautions, House Do'Urden knew that many eyes were watching the raid. Witnesses were not too much of a problem. They could not or would not care enough to identify the attacking house. But custom and rules demanded that certain attempts at secrecy be enacted, the etiquette of drow warfare. In the blink of a red glowing drow eye, House Devere became, to the rest of the city, a dark blot on Menzo Baranzon's landscape. Risen came up behind his youngest son. Well done, he signaled in the intricate finger language of the drow. Now Thane is in through the back. An easy victory, the cocky Dinan signaled back.
Well,
If
yeah, the
Matron
dark elves
Toothbay
are...
and her clerics are held at bay.
Well,
Trust
not
in
really
Matron
good
Mallory,
guys.
was Risen's response. He clapped his
Not all
son's
of them,
shoulder
anyway.
and followed his troops
Most
in
of
through
them.
the breached mushroom fence. High above the cluster of House Devere, Zaknafane rested comfortably in the current arms of Breeze's aerial servant,
Because they're
watching the
attacking
drama unfold.
other
From
dark
this
elves,
vantage,
but it's a
Zak could
different,
see within the ring of darkness and could hear
a
within the
different
ring of
family.
magical silence. Dinan's troops, the first drow soldiers in, had met resistance at every door and were being beaten badly. Now
Because
Thane and
they're
his
almost
brigade,
set up like
the troops of House Do'Urden
mob
most
families.
practiced in the ways of wizardry, came through the fence at the rear of the
Because then they
complex.
take out this
Lightning
house,
strikes and magical
then they'll
balls of
move up
acid
in the ranks.
thundered into the courtyard at the base of the Devere structures, cutting down Do'Urden fodder and Devere defenses alike. In the front courtyard, Risen and Dinan commanded the finest fighters of House Do'Urden. The blessings of Lolth were with his house, Zak could see when the battle was fully joined. For the strikes of the soldiers of House Do'Urden came faster than those of their enemies, and their aim proved more deadly. In minutes, the battle had been taken fully inside the 5 pillars. Zak stretched the incessant chill out of his arms and willed the aerial servant to action. Down he plummeted on his windy bed, and he fell free the last few feet to the terrace along the top chambers of the central pillar. At once, 2 guards, one a female, rushed out to greet him. They hesitated in confusion, though, trying to sort out the true form of this unremarkable gray blur. Too long. They had never heard of Zaknafane Do'Urden. They didn't know that death was upon them. Zak's whip flashed out, catching and gashing the female's throat, while his other hand walked his sword through a series of masterful thrusts and parries that put the male off balance. Zak finished both in a single blurring movement, snapping the whip-entwined female from the terrace with a twist of his wrist, and spinning a kick into the male's face that likewise dropped him to the cavern floor. Zak was then inside, where another guard rose up to meet him, but fell at his feet. Zak slipped along the curving wall of the stalactite tower, his cooled body blending perfectly with the stone. Soldiers of House Devere rushed all about him, trying to formulate some defense against the host of intruders who had already won out the lowest level of every structure and had taken 2 of the pillars completely. Zak was not concerned with them. He blocked out the clanging ring of adamantine weapons, the cries of command, and the screams of death, concentrating instead on a singular sound that would lead him to his destination, a unified, frantic chant. He found an empty corridor covered with spider carvings and running into the center of the pillar. As in House Do'Urden, this corridor ended in a large set of ornate double doors, their decorations dominated by arachnid forms. This must be the place, Zack muttered under his breath, fitting his hood to the top of his head. A giant spider rushed out of its concealment to his side. Zack dived to his belly and kicked out under the thing, spinning into a roll that plunged his sword deep into the monster's bulbous body. Sticky fluids gushed out over the weapons master, and the spider shuddered to a quick death. Yes, Zack whispered, wiping the spider juices from his face. This must be the place. He pulled the dead monster back into its hidden cubby and slipped in beside the thing, hoping that no one had noticed the brief struggle. By the sounds of ringing weapons, Zack could tell that the fighting had almost reached this floor. House de Vere now seemed to have its defenses in place, though, and was finally holding its ground. Now, Malice, Zack whispered, hoping that Drizzt, attuned to him in the meld, would sense his anxiety. Let us not be late. Back in the clerical anteroom of House de Werden, Malice and her subordinates continued their brutal mental assault on the clerics of House de Vere. Lolth heard their prayers louder than those of their counterparts, giving the clerics of House de Werden the stronger spells in their mental combat. Already they had easily put their enemies into a defensive posture. One of the lesser priestesses in de Vere's circle had been crushed by Breeze's mental insinuations, and now lay dead on the floor, barely inches from Matron Ginefe's feet. But the momentum had slowed suddenly, and the battle seemed to be swinging back to an even level. Matron Malice, struggling with the impending birth, could not hold her concentration, and without her voice, the spells of her unholy circle weakened. At her mother's side, powerful Drizzt clutched her mother's hand so tightly that all the blood was squeezed from it, leaving it cool, the only cool spot on a laboring female, to the eyes of the others.
Well.
Drizzt studied the contractions and the crowning cap of the coming child's white hair, and calculated the time to the moment of birth. This technique of translating the pain of birth into an offensive spell attack had never been tried before, except in legend, and Drizzt knew that timing would be the critical factor.
I do gaming,
she whispered
and at
to her mother's ear, coaxing out the words of a deadly incantation. Matron Malice echoed back the beginnings of the spell, sublimating her gasps and transforming her rage of agony into offensive power. "Didn't do it, ma Brecken Toll," Drizzt implored. "Didn't do it, ma Brecken Toll," Malice growled, so determined to focus through the pain that she bit through one of her thin lips. The baby's head appeared, more fully this time, and this time to stay. Drizzt trembled and could barely remember the incantation herself. She whispered the final rune into the matron's ear, almost fearing the consequences. Malice gathered her breath and her courage. She could feel the tingling of the spell as clearly as the pain of the birth. Through her daughters standing around the idol, staring at her in disbelief, she appeared as a red blur of heated fury, streaking sweat lines that shone as brightly as the heat of boiling water. "Arbeck," the matron began, feeling the pressure building to a crescendo. "Arbeck!" She felt the hot tear of her skin, the sudden slippery release as the baby's head pushed through, the sudden ecstasy of birthing. "Arbeck, dinna break Jord!" Malice screamed, pushing away all of the agony in a final explosion of magical power that knocked even the clerics of her own house from their feet. Carried on the thrust of Matron Malice's exultation, the Dweomer thundered into the chapel of House de Vere, shattered the gemstone idol of Lolth, sundered the double doors into heaps of twisted metal, and threw Matron Ginefe and her overmatched subordinates to the floor. Zack shook his head in disbelief as the chapel doors flew past him. "Quite a kick, Malice," he chuckled and spun around the entryway of the chapel. Using his infravision, he took a quick survey and head count of the lightless room's 7 living occupants, all struggling back to their feet, their robes tattered. Again shaking his head at the bared power of Matron Malice, Zack pulled his hood down over his face. A snap of his whip was the only explanation he offered as he smashed a tiny ceramic globe at his feet. The sphere shattered, dropping out a pellet that Drizzt had enchanted for just such occasions, a pellet glowing with the brightness of daylight. For eyes accustomed to blackness, tuned into heat emanations, the intrusion of such radiance came in a blinding flash of agony. The cleric's cries of pain only aided Zack in his systematic trek around the room, and he smiled widely under his hood every time he felt his sword fighting to drow flesh. He heard the beginnings of a spell across the way and knew that one of the De Veres had recovered enough from the assault to be dangerous. The weapons master did not need his eyes to aim, however, and the crack of his whip took Matron Ginefe's tongue right out of her mouth. Brisa placed the newborn on the back of the spider idol and lifted the ceremonial dagger, pausing to admire its cruel workmanship. Its hilt was a spider's body sporting 8 legs, barbed so as to appear furred, but angled down to serve as blades. Brisa lifted the instrument above the baby's chest. "Name the child," she implored her mother. "The Spider Queen will not accept the sacrifice until the child is named." Matron Malice lolled her head, trying to fathom her daughter's meaning. The matron mother had thrown everything into the moment of the spell and the birth, and she was now barely coherent. "Name the child," Brisa commanded, anxious to feed her hungry goddess. "It's near its end," Dinan said to his brother when they met in the lower hall of one of the lesser pillars of House of Risen his wing through to the top, and it is believed that Zaknafein's dark work has been completed. 2 score of House de Vere's soldiers have already turned allegiance to us, Nalthain replied. "They see the end," laughed Dinan. "One house serves them as well as another, and in the eyes of commoners, no house is worth dying for. Our task will be finished soon. Too quickly for anyone to take note," Nalthain said. "Now, Goerden, Dairman na Ashes Berman is the 9th house of Menzo Baranzon, and De Vere be damned." "Alert!" Dinan cried suddenly, eyes widening in feigned horror as he looked over his brother's shoulder. Nalthain reacted immediately, spinning to face the danger at his back, only to put the true danger at his back. For even as Nalthain realized the deception, Dinan's sword slipped into his spine. Dinan put his head to his brother's shoulder and pressed his cheek to Nalthain's, watching the red sparkle of heat leave his brother's eyes. "Too quickly for anyone to take note," Dinan teased, echoing his earlier words. He dropped the lifeless form to his feet. Now Dinan is elder boy of House Do'Urden, and Nalthain be damned. "Drizzt," breathed Matron Malice. "The child's name is Drizzt." Brisa tightened her grip on the knife and began the ritual. "Queen of Spiders, take this babe," she began. She raised the dagger to strike. "Drizzt Do'Urden we give to you in payment for our glorious "Wait!" called Maya from the side of the room. Her melding with her brother Nalthain had abruptly ceased. It could only mean one thing. "Nalthain is dead," she announced. "The baby is no longer the 3rd living son." Diana glanced curiously at her sister. At the same instant that Maya had seen Nalthain's death, Vierna, melded with Dinan, had felt a strong emotive surge. Elation. Vierna brought a slender finger up to her pursed lips, wondering if Dinan had successfully pulled off the assassination. Brisa still held the spider-shaped knife over the babe's chest, wanting to give this one to Lolth. "We promised the Spider Queen the 3rd living son, and that has been given. But not in sacrifice," argued Brisa. Vierna shrugged, at a loss. If Lolth accepted Nalthain, then he has been given. To give another might evoke the Spider Queen's anger. But to not give what we have promised would be worse still, Brisa persisted. "Then finish the deed," said Maya. Brisa clenched down tight on the dagger and began the ritual again. "Stay your hand," Matron Malice commanded, propping herself up in the chair. "Lolth is content. Our victory is won. Welcome, then, your brother, the newest member of House Do'Urden." "Just a male," Brisa commented in obvious disgust, walking away from the idol and the child. "Next time we shall do better," Matron Malice chuckled, though she wondered if there would be a next time. She approached the end of her 5th century of life, and drow elves, even young ones, were not a particularly fleeting lot. Brisa had been born to Malice at the youthful age of 100, but in the almost 4 centuries since, Malice had produced only 5 other children. Even this baby, Drizzt, had come as a surprise, and Malice hardly expected that she would ever conceive again. Enough of such contemplations, Malice whispered to herself, exhausted. There will be ample time. She sank back into her chair and fell into fitful, though wickedly pleasant dreams of heightening power. Zaknafein walked through the central pillar of the Devere complex, his hood in his hand and his whip and sword comfortably replaced on his belt. Every now and then a ring of battle sounded, only to be quickly ended. House Do'Urden had rolled through to victory. The 10th house had taken the 4th, and now all that remained was to remove evidence and witnesses.
Before, well, this is actually a fantasy novel.
Clerics marched through,
the Dark Elf trilogy.
The wounded Do'Urdens,
but the one the series I was playing before this was
so that the bodies could walk away
the Wheel of Time series.
Back at the Do'Urden compound, those corpses not beyond
fantasy
novels would be resurrected and put back to
fantasy
work.
And horror.
Turned away with a visible shudder as the clerics moved from room to room, the marching line of Do'Urden zombies growing ever longer at their backs. As distasteful as Zaknafein found this troop, the one that followed was even worse. Two Do'Urden clerics led a contingent of soldiers through the structure, using detection spells to determine hiding places of survivors. One stopped in the hallway just a few steps from Zak. Her eyes turned inward as she felt the emanations of respect. She held her fingers out in front of her, tracing a slow line, like some macabre divining rod, toward drow flesh.
What we're listening to,
she declared,
Robert Jordan,
pointing to a panel at the base of the wall. The soldiers jumped to it like a pack of ravenous wolves and tore through the secret door. Inside a hidden cupboard huddled the children of House Devere.
On my Audible
nobles,
account,
not commoners, and could not
are books that I've actually read.
Jack quickened his pace to get beyond
a couple
the
times already.
He heard
before.
The children's helpless screams
it's just good
as the hungry Do'Urden soldiers finished their job.
Just to be able to
Zach
kick
found
back
himself
and
in a
just listen
run.
to it. And
he rushed around a bend in the hallway, nearly bowling over Deanan and Risen. Now Thane is dead, Risen declared impassively. Zach immediately turned a suspicious eye on the younger Do'Urden's son. I killed the Devere soldier who committed the deed, Deanan assured him, not even hiding his cocky smile. Zach had been around for nearly 4 centuries, and he was certainly not ignorant of the ways of his ambitious race. The brother princes had come in defensively at the back of the lines, with a host of Do'Urden soldiers between them and the enemy. By the time they even encountered a drow that was not of their own house, the majority of the Devere's surviving soldiers had already switched allegiance to House Do'Urden. Zach doubted that either of the Do'Urden brothers had even seen action against the Devere. The description of the carnage in the prayer room has been spread throughout the ranks, Risen said to the weapons master. You performed with your usual excellence, as we have come to expect. Zach shot the patron a glare of contempt and kept on his way, down through the structure's main doors, and out beyond the magical darkness and silence into Menzo Baranzon's dark dawn. Risen was Matron Malice's present partner in a long line of partners, and no more. When Malice was finished with him, she would either relegate him back to the ranks of the common soldier, stripping him of the name Do'Urden and all the rights that accompanied it, or she would dispose of him. Zach owed him no respect. Zach moved out beyond the mushroom fence to the highest vantage point he could find, then fell to the ground. He watched, amazed, a few moments later, when the procession of the Do'Urden army, patron and son, soldiers and clerics, and the slow-moving line of 24 drow zombies made its way back home. They had lost and left behind nearly all of their slave fodder in the attack, but the line leaving the wreckage of House Devere was longer than the line that had come in earlier that night. The slaves had been replaced twofold by captured Devere slaves, and 50 or more of the Devere common troops, showing typical drow loyalty, had willingly joined the attackers. These traitorous drow would be interrogated, magically interrogated, by the Do'Urden clerics to ensure their sincerity. They would pass the test to a 1, Zach knew. Drow elves were creatures of survival, not of principle. The soldiers would be given new identities and would be kept within the privacy of the Do'Urden compound for a few months, until the fall of House Devere became an old and forgotten tale. Zach did not follow immediately. Rather, he cut through the rows of mushroom trees and found a secluded dell, where he plopped down on a patch of mossy carpet and raised his gaze to the eternal darkness of the cavern ceiling and the eternal darkness of his existence. It would have been prudent for him to remain silent at that time. He was an invader to the most powerful section of the vast city. He thought of the possible witnesses to his words, the same dark elves who had watched the fall of House de Vere, who had wholeheartedly enjoyed the spectacle. In the face of such behavior and such carnage as this night had seen, Zack could not contain his emotions. His lament came out as a plea to some god beyond his experience. What place is this that is my world? What dark coil has my spirit embodied? He whispered the angry disclaimer that had always been a part of him. In light, I see my skin is black. In darkness, it glows white in the heat of this rage I cannot dismiss. Would that I had the courage to depart this place or this life, or to stand openly against the wrongness that is the world of these my kin, to seek an existence that does not run afoul to that which I believe, and to that which I hold dear faith is truth. Zack Nafane Doerden I am called, yet a drow I am not, by choice or by deed. Let them discover this being that I am then. Let them rain their wrath on these old shoulders, already burdened by the hopelessness of Menzo Berenzon. Ignoring the consequences, the weapons master rose to his feet and yelled, "Menzo Berenzon, what hell are you?" A moment later, when no answer echoed back out of the quiet city, Zack flexed the remaining chill of Breeze's wand from his weary muscles. He found some comfort as he patted the whip on his belt, the instrument that had taken the tongue from the mouth of a matron mother. 3. The eyes of a child. Massage, the young apprentice, which at this point in his magic-using career meant that he was no more than a cleaning attendant, leaned on his broom and watched as Alton de Vere moved through the door into the highest chamber of the spire. Massage almost felt sympathy for the student, who had to go in and face the faceless one. Massage felt excitement as well, though, knowing that the ensuing fireworks between Alton and the faceless master would be well worth the watching. He went back to his sweeping, using the broom as an excuse to get farther around the curve of the room's floor, closer to the door. "You requested my presence, Master Faceless One?" Alton de Vere said again, keeping one hand in front of his face and squinting to fight the brilliant glare of the room's 3 lighted candles. Alton shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, just inside the shadowy room's door. Hunched across the way, the Faceless One kept his back to the young de Vere. Better to be done with this cleanly, the master reminded himself. He knew, though, that the spell he was now preparing would kill Alton before the student could learn his family's fate, before the Faceless One could fully complete Deanan Doerden's final instructions. Too much was at stake. Better to be done with this cleanly. "You," Alton began again, but he prudently held his words and tried to sort out the situation before him. How unusual to be summoned to the private chambers of a master of the academy before the day's lessons had even begun. When he had first received the summons, Alton feared that he had somehow failed one of his lessons.
When I get back, we'll
Could be a
do another
fatal
dab.
mistake in Sorcerer. Alton was close to graduation, but the disdain of a single master could put an end to that. He had done quite well in his lessons with the Faceless One, had even believed that this mysterious master favored him. Could this call be simply a courtesy of congratulations on his impending graduation? Unlikely, Alton realized against his hopes. Masters of the Drow Academy did not often congratulate students. Alton then heard quiet chanting and noticed that the master was in the midst of spellcasting. Something cried out as very wrong to him now. Something about this whole situation did not fit the strict ways of the academy. Alton set his feet firmly and tensed his muscles, following the advice of the motto that had been drilled into the thoughts of every student at the academy. The precept that kept drow elves alive in a society so devoted to chaos. Be prepared. The doors exploded before him, showering the room with stone splinters and throwing Massage back against the wall. He felt the show well worth both the inconvenience and the new bruise on his shoulder when Alton DeVere scrambled out of the room. The student's back and left arm trailed wisps of smoke, and the most exquisite expression of terror and pain that Massage had ever seen was etched on the DeVere noble's face. Alton stumbled to the floor and kicked into a roll, desperate to put some ground between himself and the murderous master. He made it down and around the descending arc of the room's floor, and through the door that led into the next lower chamber, just as the faceless one made his appearance at the sundered door. The master stopped to spit a curse at his misfire, and to consider the best way to replace his door. "Clean it up," he snapped at Massage, who was again leaning casually, with his hands atop his broomstick and his chin atop his hands. Massage obediently dropped his head and started sweeping the stone splinters. He looked up as the faceless one stalked past, however, and cautiously started after the master. Alton couldn't possibly escape, and this show would be too good to miss. The third room, the faceless one's private library, was the brightest of the four in the spire, with dozens of candles burning on each wall. "Damn this light!" Alton spat, stumbling his way down through the dizzying blur to the door that led to the faceless one's entry hall, the lowest room of the master's quarters. If he could get down from this spot and outside of the tower to the courtyard of the academy, he might be able to turn the momentum against the master. Alton's world remained the darkness of Menzoberranzan, but the faceless one, who had spent so many decades in the candlelight of Sorcerre, had grown accustomed to using his eyes to see shades of light, not heat. The entry hall was cluttered with chairs and chests, but only one
About to
candle
do another
burned,
dab.
and Alton could see clearly enough to dodge or leap any obstacles. He rushed to the door and grabbed the heavy latch. It turned easily enough, but when Alton tried to shoulder through, the door did not budge, and a burst of sparkling blue energy threw him back to the floor. "Curse this place," Alton spat. The portal was magically held. He knew a spell to open such enchanted doors, but doubted whether his magic would be strong enough to dispel the castings of a master. In his haste and fear, the words of the Dweomer floated through Alton's thoughts in an indecipherable jumble. "Do not run, DeVere," came the faceless one's call from the previous chamber. "You only lengthen your torment." "A curse upon you too," Alton replied under his breath. Alton forgot about the stupid spell. It would never come to him in time. He glanced around the room for an option. His eyes found something unusual halfway up the side wall, in an opening between two large windows. Alton scrambled back a few steps to get a better angle, but found himself caught within the range of the cavity, within the deceptive field where his eyes registered both heat and light. He could only discern that this section of the wall showed a uniform glow in the heat spectrum, and that its hue was subtly different from the stone of the walls. Another doorway. Alton could only hope his guess to be right. He rushed back to the center of the room, stood directly across from the object, and forced his eyes away from the infrared spectrum, fully back into the world of light. As his eyes adjusted, what came into view both startled and confused the young DeVere. He saw no doorway, nor any opening with another chamber behind it. What he looked upon was a reflection of himself, and a portion of the room he now stood. Alton had never, in his 55 years of life, witnessed such a spectacle, but he had heard the masters of Sorcerre speak of these devices. It was a mirror. A movement in the upper doorway of the chamber reminded Alton that the faceless one was almost upon him. He couldn't hesitate to ponder his options. He put his head down and charged the mirror. Perhaps it was a teleportation door to another section of the city, perhaps a simple door to a room beyond, or perhaps, Alton dared to imagine in those few desperate seconds, this was some interplanar gate that would bring him into a strange and unknown plane of existence. He felt the tingling excitement of adventure pulling him on as he neared the wondrous thing. Then he felt only the impact, the shattering glass, and the unyielding stone wall behind it. Perhaps it was just a mirror. "Look at his eyes," Vierna whispered to Maya as they examined the newest member of House Toer. Truly, the eyes were remarkable. Though the child had been out of the womb for less than an hour, the pupils of his orbs darted back and forth inquisitively. While they showed the expected radiating glow of eyes seeing into the infrared spectrum, the familiar redness was tinted by a shade of blue, giving them a violet hue. Blind? Wondered mine. Perhaps this one will be given to the Spider Queen still. Breeza looked back to them anxiously. Dark elves did not allow children showing any physical deficiency to live. Not blind, replied Mira, passing her hand over the child and casting an angry glare at both of her eager sisters. He follows my fingers. Maya saw that Vierna spoke the truth. She leaned closer to the babe, studying his face in strange eyes. What do you see, Drizzt? She asked softly, not in an act of gentleness toward the babe, but so that she would not disturb her mother, resting in the chair at the head of the spider island. What do you see that the rest of us cannot? Glass crunched under Alton, digging deeper wounds as he shifted his weight in an effort to rise to his feet. What would it matter, he thought. My mirror, he heard the faceless one groan, and he looked up to see the outraged master towering over him. How huge he seemed to Alton, how great and powerful, fully blocking the candlelight from this little alcove between the cabinets, his form enhanced tenfold to the eyes of the helpless victim by the mere implications of his presence. Alton then felt a gooey substance floating down around him, detached webbing finding a sticky hold on the cabinets, on the wall, and on Alton. The young Devere tried to leap up and roll away, but the faceless one's spell already held him fast, trapped him as a dirged fly would be trapped in the strands of a spider's home. First my door, the faceless one growled at him, and now this, my mirror. Do you know the pains I suffered to acquire such a rare device? Alton turned his head from side to side, not in answer, but to free at least his face from the binding substance. Why did you not just stand still and let the deed be finished cleanly? The faceless one roared, thoroughly disgusted. Why? Alton lisped, spitting some of the webbing from his thin lips. Why would you want to kill me? Because you broke my mirror, the faceless one shot back. It didn't make any sense, of course. The mirror had only been shattered after the initial attack. But to the master, Alton supposed, it didn't have to make sense. Alton knew his cause to be hopeless, but he continued on in his efforts to dissuade his opponent. You know of my house, of House Devere, he said indignant. Fourth in the city. Matron Ginnife will not be pleased. A high priestess has ways to learn the truth of such situations. House Devere? The faceless one laughed. Perhaps the torments that Dinan Do'Urden had requested would be in line after all. Alton had broken his mirror. Fourth house, Alton spat. Foolish youth, the faceless one cackled. House Devere is no more. Not fourth, not 54th, nothing. Alton slumped, though the webbing did its best to hold his body erect. What could the master be babbling about? They are all dead, the faceless one taunted. Matron Ginnife sees love more clearly this day. Alton's expression of horror pleased the disfigured master. All dead, he snarled one more time, except for poor Alton, who lives on to hear of his family's misfortune. That oversight shall be remedied now. The faceless one raised his hands to cast a spell. Who? Alton cried. The faceless one paused and seemed not to understand. What house did this? The doomed student clarified. Or what conspiracy of houses brought down Devere? Ah, you should be told, replied the faceless one, obviously enjoying the situation. I suppose it is your right to know before you join your kin in the realm of death. A smile widened across the opening where his lips once had been. But you broke my mirror, the master growled. Die, stupid, stupid boy. Find your own answers. The Faceless One's chest jerked out suddenly, and he shuddered in convulsions, babbling tongues in a tongue far beyond the terrified stupid's comprehension. What vile spell did this disfigured master have prepared for him, so wretched that its chant sounded in an arcane language foreign to learned Alton's ears, so unspeakably evil that its semantics jerked on the very edge of its caster's control? The Faceless One then fell forward to the floor and expired. Stunned, Alton followed the line of the master's hood down to his back, to the tail of a protruding dart. Alton watched the poisoned thing as it continued to shudder from the body's impact. Then he turned his scan upward to the center of the room, where the young cleaning attendant stood calmly. "Nice weapon, Faceless One," Massage beamed, rolling a two-handed, crafted crossbow over in his hands. He threw a wicked smile at Alton and fitted another dart. Matron Malice hoisted herself out of her chair and willed herself to her feet. "Out of the way," she snapped at her daughters. Maya and Vierna scooted away from the spider idol and the baby. "See his eyes, Matron Mother," Vierna dared to remark. "They are so unusual." Matron Malice studied the child. Everything seemed in place, and a good thing, too, for Nalthane, elder boy of House Do'Urden, was dead, and this boy Drizzt would have a difficult job replacing the valuable son. "His eyes," Vierna said again. The matron shot her a venomous look, but bent low to see what the fuss was about. "Purple?" Malice said, startled. Never had she heard of such a thing. "He is not blind," Maya was quick to put in, seeing the disdain spreading across her mother's face. "Fetch the candle," Matron Malice ordered. "Let us see how these eyes appear in the world of light." Maya and Vierna reflexively headed to the sacred cabinet, but Briza cut them off. "Only a high priestess may touch the holy items," she reminded them, in a tone that carried the weight of a threat. She spun around haughtily, reached into the cabinet, and produced a single, half-used red candle. The clerics hid their eyes, and Matron Malice put a prudent hand over the baby's face as Briza lit the sacred candle. It produced only a tiny flame, but to Drow eyes it came as a brilliant intrusion. "Bring it," said Matron Malice after several moments of adjusting. Briza moved the candle near Drizzt, and Malice gradually slid her hand away. "He does not cry," Briza remarked, amazed that the babe could quietly accept such a stinging light. "Purple again," whispered the matron, paying no heed to her daughter's rambling. "In both worlds, the child's eyes show as purple." Vierna gasped audibly when she looked again upon her tiny brother and his striking lavender orbs. "He is your brother," Matron Malice reminded her, viewing Vierna's gasp as a hint of what might come. "When he grows older, and those eyes pierce you so, remember on your life that he is your brother." Vierna turned away, almost blurting a reply she would have regretted making. Matron Malice's exploits with nearly every male soldier of the Do'Urden house, and many others that the seductive matron managed to sneak away from other houses, were almost legendary in Menzoberran's time. Who was she to be spouting reminders of prudent and proper behavior? Vierna bit her lip and hoped that neither Briza nor Malice had been reading her thoughts at that moment. In Menzoberran's, thinking such gossip about a high priestess, whether or not it was true, got you painfully executed. Her mother's eyes now, and Vierna thought she had been discovered. "He is yours to prepare," Matron Malice said to her. "Maya is younger," Vierna dared to protest.
Oh shit,
"I could
22.
attain the level of high priestess in but a few years if I may keep to my studies." "Or never," the matron sternly reminded her. "Take the child to the chapel proper. Wean him to words and teach him all that he will need to know to properly serve as a page prince of House Do'Urden.
You can't beat that.
I will
birthday
sit to him,"
present.
Briza offered, one hand subconsciously slipping to her snake-headed whip. "I do so enjoy teaching males their place in our world." Malice glared at her. "You are a high priestess. You have other duties more important than word-weaning a male child." Then to Vierna she said, The babe is yours. Do not disappoint me in this. The lessons you teach Drizzt will reinforce your own understanding of our ways. This exercise at mothering will aid you in your quest to become a high priestess. She let Vienna take a moment to view the task in a more positive light. Then her tone became unmistakably threatening once again.
Hey, Enforcer, how you doing, bro?
But it surely can destroy.
Yeah, Enforcer, I'm
thoughts silent. The chore that Matron Malice had dropped on her shoulders would consume the bulk of her time for at least 10 years. Vienna didn't like the prospects, she and this purple-eyed child together for 10 long years. The alternative,
cash, yeah.
The wrath of Matron Malice seemed a worse thing by far.
Hey, Enforcer, how you doing, brother?
Alton blew another web from his mouth.
My bad, I missed it.
You are just a boy, an apprentice.
I'm running blind
Why
right
would
now,
you
Enforcer.
Kill him? Massage finished the thought. Not to save you,
tell
if
her I
that is
said
your
happy
hope.
early birthday.
He spat down at the faceless one's body. Look at me, a prince of the 6th house, a cleaning steward for that wretched Hunnett, Alton cut in. House Hunnett is the 6th house. The younger drow put a finger to pursed lips. Wait, he remarked with a widening smile, an evil smile of sarcasm. We are the 5th house now, I suppose, with Devere wiped out. Not yet, Alton growled. Momentarily, Massage assured him, fingering the crossbow quarrel. Alton slumped even farther back in the web. To be killed by a master was bad enough, but the indignity of being shot down by a boy. I suppose I should thank you, Massage said. I had planned to kill that one for many 10 days. Why? Alton pressed his new assistant. You would dare to kill a master of Sorcerer simply because your family put you in servitude to him? Because he would snub me, Massage yelled. 4 years I have slaved for him, that back end of a carrion crawler, cleaned his boots, prepared salve for his disgusting face. Was it ever enough? Not for that one. He spat at the corpse again and continued, talking more to himself than to the trapped student. Nobles aspiring to wizardry have the advantage of being trained as apprentices before they reach the proper age for entry into Sorcerer. Of course, Alton said. I myself trained under. He meant to keep me out of Sorcerer, Massage rambled, ignoring Alton altogether. He would have forced me into Melee Magvir, the fighter's school, instead. The fighter's school! My 25th birthday is only 10 days away. Massage looked up, as though he suddenly remembered that he was not alone in the room. I knew I must kill him, he continued, now speaking directly to Alton. Then you come along and make it all so convenient. A student and master killing each other in a fight? It has happened before. Who would question it? I suppose, then, that I should thank you, Alton Devere of no house worth mentioning. Massage chided with a low, sweeping bow. Before I kill you, I mean. Wait, cried Alton. Kill me to what gain? Alibi. But you have your alibi, and we can make it better. Explain, said Massage, who admittedly was in no particular hurry. The faceless one was a high-level wizard. The webs weren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Helps out with sleep,
Alton said earnestly. Can you be as stupid as the faceless one proclaimed you? Alton took the insult stoically. The kid had the crossbow. Free me, so that I may assume the faceless one's identity, he explained. The death of a master arouses suspicion, but if no master is believed dead. And what of this? Massage asked, kicking the corpse. Burn it, said Alton, his desperate plan coming fully into focus. Let it be Alton Devere. House Devere is no more, so there will be no retaliation, no questions. Massage seemed skeptical. The faceless one was practically a hermit, Alton reasoned. And I am near to graduation. Certainly, I can handle the simple chores of basic teaching after 30 years of study. And what is my gain? Alton gawked, nearly burying himself in webbing, as if the answer were obvious. A master in Sorcerer to call mentor, one who can ease your way through your years of study, and one who can dispose of a witness at his earliest convenience, Massage added slyly. And what would then be my gain? Alton shot back. To anger House Hunnet, fifth in all the city, and I with no family at my back? No, young Massage, not as stupid as the faceless one named me. Massage ticked a long and pointed fingernail against his teeth and considered the possibilities. An ally among the masters of Sorcerer? This held possibilities. Another thought popped into Massage's mind, and he pulled open the cabinet to Alton's side and began rummaging through the contents. Alton flinched when he heard some ceramic and glass containers crashing together, thinking of the components, possibly even completed potions that might be lost by the apprentice's carelessness. Perhaps Melee MacVeer would be a better choice for this one, he thought. A moment later, though, the younger drow reappeared, and Alton remembered that he was in no position to make such judgments.
How's your night going,
This is mine, Massage demanded, showing Alton a small black object.
Hope
A
everyone's
remarkably
having a
detailed
good,
onyx
safe
figurine
evening
of a hunting panther,
and have
a
good
gift from a
weekend.
denizen of the lower plains for some help I gave to him. You aided such a creature? Alton had to ask, finding it difficult to believe that a mere apprentice had the resources necessary to even survive an encounter with such an unpredictable and mighty foe. The faceless one. Massage kicked the corpse again. Took the credit and the statue, but they are mine. Everything else in here will go to you, of course. I know the magical dweomers of most, and will show you what is what. Brightening at the hope that he would indeed survive this dreadful day, Alton cared little about the figurine at that moment. All he wanted was to be freed of the web. Truth of his house's fate. Then Massage, ever a confusing young drow, turned suddenly and started away. Where are you going? Alton asked. To get the acid. Acid? Alton hid his panic well, though he had a terrible feeling that he understood what Massage meant to do. You want the disguise to appear authentic, Massage explained matter-of-factly. Otherwise, it would not be much of a disguise. We should take advantage of the web while it lasts. It will hold you still. No, Alton started to protest, but Massage wheeled on him, the evil grin wide on his face. It does seem a bit of pain, and a lot of trouble to go through, Massage admitted. You have no family and will find no allies in Sorcerer, since the faceless one was so despised by the other masters. He brought the crossbow up level with Alton's eyes and fitted another poison dart. Perhaps you would prefer death. Get the acid, Alton cried. To what end? Massage teased, waving the crossbow. What have you to live for? Alton DeVere, of no house worth mentioning. Revenge, Alton sneered. The sheer wrath of his tone setting the confident Massage on his heels. You have not learned this yet, though you will, my young student. But nothing in life gives more purpose than the hunger for revenge. Massage lowered the bow and eyed the trapped drow with respect, almost fear. Still, the apprentice Hunnet could not appreciate the gravity of Alton's proclamation until Alton reiterated, this time with an eager smile on his face. Get the acid. The first house. 4 cycles of Narvandale. 4 days later.
All right, everyone. I'm probably going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. And I hope everyone has a safe weekend and everyone stay safe out there. Until next time, everyone.